Corinne works for Keeping Children Safe, and she was spearheading the writing of this standard on human resources. And so today we're going to focus on Standard 2, where we've really tried to pull out, of course, you're all human resource people, so we don't need to teach you about human resources, but Corinne and I just want to give you the ins and outs of just when you're hiring child protection people, what do you have to keep in mind? And hereby I hand over to Corinne.
The two aspects that I'm highlighting here on the slide that are really important is firstly that all staff sign up to and read and sign up to a code of conduct that describes what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. And the second thing I wanted to highlight here is that there is a mechanism for staff or volunteers or anyone that has concerns about a child and a child at risk of harm by an organisation staff or by being involved in an organisation's programme or operations, are clear on where to make that report so that action can be taken. This is fairly common and fairly standard, but some of the findings, if you speak to people who are actually in the middle of an emergency response, is that this often goes by the wayside. So even though a parent organisation, I say in inverted commas, might actually have a child safeguarding policy, quite frequently when staff or volunteers are mobilised during an emergency, they don't get to see that policy and they don't get to sign that code of conduct. So it's very important that this is made available and that everybody signs up to that. Those of you that are working in human resources, this is fairly standard for you, that you're wanting to ensure that you recruit the right personnel. So obviously, what's the job that you're recruiting to or the type of role that you're recruiting to, and that needs to be clear. What's been provided by CPWG, Child Protection Working Group, in addition, if you like, to the minimum standards, is this child protection competency framework that you can see. This framework is excellent. It's very comprehensive, it's quite detailed, and it provides a list of competencies that you can draw on to build the profile of the job or the type of role that you're recruiting to. So the framework has the core child protection competencies, it has the humanitarian competencies, and then competencies for child protection programming. So it's really a useful document to draw on. Do ask probing questions around, you know, why somebody actually wants to work with children, what's their motivation, what's their understanding of safeguarding or protecting children and vulnerable adults. Those sorts of questions are really good, not just in terms of making sure that someone's right for the role, you know, they have the right motivation to work with children, but these questions are also quite good at highlighting or eliciting gaps or areas of concern that you might have as to why that person wants to work with children in the first place.
The police checks are pretty much impossible for my region to have. We don't have the system in place, and getting recommendations that are answering your requests is also something very difficult to get because it's a small community and everybody knows everybody. So you really have to be very smart in the way you phrase your questions to get the answers you want to have.
The fact that it is difficult for people like you to get police checks and it's also difficult for references is something that's been highlighted internationally, and we hope that there will be some moves that are made by the police forces that will help make that a bit easier. You've put your policy and procedures in place, you've recruited hopefully the right people to the job, and now they're in the job, and what are you doing with them? So the first area that's really important is induction, and the bullets here that you can see on the slide just outline the very basics of what the induction should include. For those of you that are working in human resources, obviously this is fairly much kind of bread and butter for you, I would imagine. So you're talking or inducting people on the context in which they're going to be working, their specific role, and the team that they're going to be working with. And I think for some of you, this may seem quite obvious, but again, some of the staff that I've met, it's quite surprising how many of them there wasn't the time apparently to do a proper induction with them, so they're not kind of prepared for what they're going to experience, what they're going to see, exactly what their role is going to involve and who they're working with. So it's really important that this is done before somebody, or at the time that somebody gets into the role. At this point in the induction process, also what's important is to make sure that they understand fully what their obligations are to safeguard children and safeguard vulnerable adults. So this is meeting the requirements of the child safeguarding policy, but it's also meeting the requirements of the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, which should be built into all humanitarian personnel's code of conduct. And that should outline exactly what appropriate behaviour is and what unacceptable behaviour is, both during working hours and outside of working hours, and then the feedback mechanisms that are available for staff to feedback on anything that might be going wrong, not necessarily in terms of children. That's one side of things, is that if they have concerns about children, how can they feedback on that, but also what's there for them to feedback if they're, worried about themselves, about their work. That all needs to be clear. The induction, of course, is the one initial part of a whole cycle, if you like, of capacity building. So having had the induction, staff get into the nuts and bolts of their work. They then need to work through with their manager what development plan, what individual staff development plan do they need to build their skills, their knowledge and skills effectively to work on child protection programming. The third and fourth, I should say, bullets here are really just a reminder that that capacity building can cover quite a range of things. So it's not just about training. There's lots of on-the-job opportunities for people to develop competencies. And again, although that might seem fairly obvious, talking with staff who have a high workload and are in, quite a sort of frantic response mode at certain times of their job, it's their capacity building and their learning is often the thing that goes out of the window because there's not enough time for that to take place. So the challenge here is for both the staff and the manager to be creative around what's needed for that person working on child protection programming, and how can they avail themselves of that learning without having to leave the job always to go and receive training. So it's up to the staff and the manager to source those opportunities. And do try and create time within the staff's work schedule to have learning, so it doesn't just feel as if they're just delivering, but without taking any time out to reflect on what they've delivered and look at whether that's worked well and how they can develop themselves further.
For us working with recruitment, it could be interesting to hear from you what you consider to be the most relevant work experience for someone who is entering child protection.
It depends very much on the role that you're recruiting to. I mean, there's a range of roles within child protection programming sphere. I think that if you're recruiting somebody that's working directly with children, you do want to have somebody that has an experience of working with groups of children, or if not working directly with them, that they've had some experience of kind of, you know, understanding of facilitating groups of children, you know, how children work, you know, how you would be able to discuss things with them, how you engage children, that sort of thing. Whether that means that you want to have kind of, you know, 5 to 10 years of experience in it, that for me would be a question. I think you're looking, and this is the beauty of the competencies framework, you're looking at how people are able to behave, if you like, with children. I don't mean that in terms of whether they've got good behaviour or bad behaviour, but more on how you engage children. Are they good children's facilitators? Can they bring groups of children together? Can they manage discussions with children? That sort of thing. But then there's a whole range of knowledge that you want, depending on the different areas of work that you're working on. So if you're working on issues around children being separated from their parents or families, and how you would, you know, trace them and get children back again, then there's a whole area of work or competency or skill, if you like, or experience on whether those people have had that experience, have done that already, what the successes they have, and whether they can apply that to a different context. Again, you know, does that mean lots and lots of experience, or whether you can just ask, you know, the right sorts of questions at interview to see, you know, what they've done in the past that they can build on to bring to the new job. What I would be anxious about doing is not kind of closing opportunities to people that might be fairly new into the emergency field or fairly new into the child protection field. I would very much look at how they can draw on their previous experiences elsewhere to bring into the role that you're recruiting them to. So there'll be a lot of people who've worked in development contexts, for instance, on child protection work that could apply that within the emergency field, and there may be people that have worked in the emergency field but not necessarily on child protection, but have worked with children on other issues that could then make the transition more easily through to child protection in emergencies.
What can remote line managers ask, and how can they instigate a discussion around the minimum standards to see, you know, to sort of check in on how those deployees are using it in their work?
What we usually do in the HR field on kind of performance review is to do that kind of 360 one. So that deployee will be working with a number of other people. So I think it's useful that there's an agreement up front where the deployee and the line manager geographically distant, so to speak, that the deployee's progress will be informed by the deployee, but also by a couple of colleagues that the deployee is working alongside, so that and that can be done in a way that it's not about the deployee colleagues, you know, informing on the deployee, but done in a way where there's an open discussion amongst a group of people that are working closely together as to how the deployees got on, the progress the deployees made, and areas for improvement. And I think that helps to for the deployee to make it feel that it's more real in the context in which they're working, and it's not just about a line manager, you know, looking in 30 days remotely without having any idea from anyone else as to how that deployee may have been performing.